Hi, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you all for joining us today at the Just Economy Conference for this particular panel conversation that we're calling Home and Community Care, Our Path to Lasting Economic Recovery. My name is Josephine Calapenny. I am the Deputy Director at Family Values at Work and a strategic advisor for Caring Across Generations. And I'm going to be in conversation today with Grace and Nicole as we talk about why home care is an important part of our economic recovery. We all care. Caring is what makes us human. Yet, caregivers, who are a majority women, have long been the silent and undervalued backbone of the economy, providing nearly $500 billion in unpaid care. I want to say that again. The uncompensated, unpaid care that many women caregivers provide to our community, our loved ones, our children, family members with disabilities, our aging adults, is upwards of $500 billion in value. Most caregivers are majority women of color and immigrants and are paid poverty wages for this essential work. And up until now, we all know that the economy has only worked for a select few of us and left many of us in the dust. The numbers don't add up in a way that is evident that it works for all of us. We have seen stagnant wages while the cost of living continues to increase, and this includes the cost of care. Due to structural racism, including medical racism, racism in our tax code, and housing policies that keep Black families and people with disabilities from building intergenerational wealth, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and family caregivers often take on greater personal costs to provide care, paying out of pocket, often leaving jobs earlier, and spending higher proportions of our income and more time on care than our white counterparts. We know that the pandemic drew attention to how care work is consistently underfunded and undervalued, but our economy and culture has long devalued care because it's often seen as the work of women and the work that happens behind closed doors. The economy has never worked for people with disabilities. Nicole and I talk about this all the time. We're forced to live under the poverty line just to receive the services and that we need through Medicaid, which is one of the only providers that you can get home care from. At the same time, older people and people with disabilities live in constant fear that services will be cut and will be forced into institutions because we play the nickel and dime game to these essential services and programs. So we know that the coronavirus has laid bare how essential caregiving is and how inequitable supports of care are. And our elected officials are finally, after decades of advocacy from the disabilities community, from the worker justice community, from the immigration community, and from the caregiving community, our elected officials are finally starting to give real value to care. As we can see from Biden's recent announcement of his plan to invest $400 billion in home and community-based care and to strengthen the care workforce. Now is the time to demand what we need and to change the trajectory of our futures and how we get to age, live in our homes and in our communities long into our later years. The care supports that our families need come in many forms, from universal childcare to comprehensive paid leave to long-term services and supports that help our elders and disabled loved ones stay at home and in their communities. Today, we're here to talk about how home and community based care, one of these key supports, is essential to building the just and equitable care infrastructure that everyone, including historically marginalized communities, need. And I am so excited to be joined by Grace and by Nicole. I'm going to ask each one of you to introduce yourself and to tell us your connection to care. Let's start with Grace.
Uh, Good morning, everyone. My name is Marie Grace Diaz. I'm a Filipino immigrant residing in Los Angeles, California. I'm an active member of Filipino Worker Center, a caregiver for almost 18 years. All through those years, I took care of senior patients with a lot of uh, different health conditions such as Alzheimer, Parkinson disease, Lewy body dementia, stroke patient, multiple scoliosis, and many others. I am undocumented for 13 years.
Thank you for sharing that, Grace. Your courage and your bravery. Nicole, let's go to you.
Yes, thank you, Grace, and thank you, Josie. My name is Nicole Jorwick. I'll use she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm the Senior Director of Public Policy and Senior Executive Officer of State Advocacy for the ARC of the United States. We are the largest community-based organization serving and supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. This work is something that's personal to me, though, because I've been both a paid direct care worker before when I was working my way through college and law school, and also I am a family caregiver. My brother Chris is 31 and has autism and is a much better advocate than I am. I also deal with the aging side with two grandmothers who have pretty significant needs, one with a Parkinson's diagnosis, so definitely very much respect and value the work that Grace does. And glad to be here to talk about this extremely important issue at a time where, as you said, Josie, it's getting a lot of attention.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, Grace. Let's dig right in and really get into the meat and heart of this conversation. Nicole, talk to me. You and I talk about this all the time. Talk to me about what our current systems of caring for older adults and disabled loved ones looks like now. And tell us about your experiences and your family's experiences for about care and caregiving and what is and isn't accessible. And this is such an important conversation to have because so many people think, you know, when I'm ready, I'm going to be able to access exactly what I need, when I need it, and where I need it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's such a really important point, Josie, because I think that really what we've learned in really the past 5 years, because frankly, a lot of the interest that's going on politically right now is because of so many of the threats that have come to the systems that we're talking about. And when I'm talking about the systems, really the main game in town that I'm talking about, and you reference this in your opening remarks, is the Medicaid program. And a lot of folks don't understand that. A lot of people think that when they get to a point where they need a nursing home, or really people are avoiding nursing homes now, obviously, especially since the pandemic, thankfully. But if when you might be aging and need some home health care, or you have a child with a disability who might need supports, a lot of people think that that's going to come through the Medicare program. Medicare actually does not fund any long-term services and supports outside of a short-term acute care stay or rehabilitation from a surgery, something like a stroke, something like that, very short-term. So anything long-term, so that's when we're talking about long-term care or long-term services and support, which is the term we use more now, that is what really the main funder for that is Medicaid. And Medicaid is a program that's very complicated. It's a program that is overseen by a federal law, but it is a state and federal partnership, and it's a program that is run by states. And there's lots of reasons why that matters. Part of it is because it's called different things in different states. So when some of those threats have come about in the past 5 years, a lot of people didn't even realize that the services that their families were relying on, or that they themselves were relying on, were paid for by Medicaid. And Medicaid is a program that is old. It was created in 1965, and so it needs a lot of modernization. It's also a program that has very strict income and asset and eligibility requirements that leave a lot of people out, or require people to go into poverty and stay in poverty in order to access the services that they need. This impacts the disabled community. It also impacts people with older adults who might have spent a long time saving up so that they could leave something behind for their families, and then can't do that in order to access the services they need to live safely and healthily. Medicaid also needs to be modernized in the fact that it has what we call an institutional bias. What I mean by that is that Medicaid has an entitlement to institutional services. So that means anybody could receive those nursing home services or institutional care, because a lot of people don't realize that in 36 states still, people with disabilities are being served, and I use that air quotes, but are being kept in large institutions still, including my home state of Illinois. And that's my home state of Illinois, unfortunately. And Josie, I know we're both of our home states. It's not a great example for a lot of things. It does create good advocates, though. But the reason for that is that Illinois is one of those states that still has those institutions open and heavily relies on nursing facilities as well for older adults. And so because of that, that's where a lot of the funding is going in that broader pool of long-term services and support. And because people who are eligible have an entitlement to those services, there's not that same entitlement to home and community-based services. Those services are optional under the federal law that oversees those state programs. And because of that, there can be waiting lists. And so in Illinois, there are 20,000 people on the waiting list. And frankly, that's only people who know that there's a waiting list to be on. And there's a lot of disparity in terms of access to information around the services that are available for people with disabilities and aging adults, which is a huge and important factor. And even a lot of the workforce that are providing these services don't realize the funding, the funding that pays their paychecks, and the problems in the system that lead to the low wages for people that are providing home care, people that are direct support professionals, personal care attendants. All of those wages are funded through Medicaid, and those wages have been stagnant for decades. Nationally, the wages are less than $12 an hour, and we're talking about this life-giving, important care. And so these are then workers that are having to work multiple jobs and in poverty when they're doing work that is so incredibly important. And I know that from a personal perspective, because without that, my brother was one of those 20,000 people on the waiting list. So my personal connection to the issue is, we were one of those families that when people with disabilities move from the entitlement, meaning the guarantee of services in the education system, to the adult service system, depending on the state where you live, the outlook can be very, very grim. And so without it, there's an over-reliance on unpaid family caregivers, and there continues to be a lack of individualized programming because of the lack of investment in home and community-based services at the state level and the federal government. And that leads to people not getting services, including my brother, which has led to different regressions, behaviorally, medically, at different points in time. And ultimately, we really need to focus on this because of the inequities for the workforce and also around access to services. So there's a lot of work to do, but this attention is really good and well-timed.
Thanks, Nicole. Such good information there. I think the thing to remember is that most people think they're going to get a lot of home care from Medicare. That's not necessarily the case. Because home care and overall long-term services and supports can be expensive, most people can't afford it out of their own pocket. And so most people rely on Medicaid, and Medicaid needs to be updated, needs to be invested in order to really meet the current demand. And the other thing that you said that I think is really important is we have to think about this in a comprehensive way that considers the needs of the person who needs care and considers the needs of the people who are giving care, which are family caregivers and which are workers like you used to do, Nicole, and like you, Grace. So Grace, tell us your experience as a care worker within our current system. What have you seen? What's it like? What are the things you want to elevate for us?
In our current system right now, caregivers and essential domestic workers actually have very, very low wages, as Nicole have said. Some of us are even paid by the day, not by the hour, way, way below the minimum wage. And also, aside from the low wages, we lack benefits. We don't even have no health insurance, and because of the low wages also, we don't have the resources to save for our retirement. And because of the nature of our work, we have job insecurity also. What scares me most is losing my job at a blink of an eye because I don't have no savings and have no access to unemployment benefits. I have to hold multiple jobs to have job security. My sister was even commenting I'm one of the few person who's so happy to be working 6 days a week. Anyway, another I want to miss treatment of undocumented workers by my agency that I was working for because they knew for a fact that I was undocumented during that time. I experienced even training a new caregiver, but ending up getting less days of work because she was legal. A lot of undocumented essential workers are being treated badly because when abused, they stay silent so as not to be deported.
Grace, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think it's easy to not think about all of the different people that are affected by our current care system as it is. It goes all the way to the workers. And I know our care system is unaffordable for people who need care, but it's also really sad to consider that people who are providing care can't even make enough to care for their own families. And that's definitely something that we need to change. Nicole, though the pandemic has highlighted that family caregivers are essential and need supports, um, what that caregivers need supports and caregivers have lacked meaningful support for decades. What are the actual economic impacts of a failing and fractured care system on your families in our communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the first one is the historic underemployment and unemployment rate of people with disabilities. And a lot of that too is, again, because of the strict income and asset limit requirements. In order to continue to receive the services that they need to work, people with disabilities can't work more. And so one major economic impact is on people with disabilities themselves who want to be working more. But also family caregivers. Families have to make decisions about promotions and advancements based on their care responsibilities. A Harvard Business School study came out a couple of years ago that talked about 80%, I believe, of family members have factoring in their caregiving responsibilities and turning down advancement and that sort of thing. And that didn't surprise me at all. It surprised others, but it didn't surprise me. Even if you're not directly responsible for a person with a disability or aging caregiver, that doesn't mean that the needs of that individual are not part of any factoring that you're doing, whether it's moving, whether it's how much time you can spend away. We also obviously know that there are, as I mentioned earlier, huge racial and cultural components around access to care, and a huge mentality of obviously some cultures have a strong history of taking care of their own, and there's nothing wrong with that, but there's an economic toll there. If we're providing the care for our own, then that means that we're not working outside of the home typically, or if we are, we're working outside of the home too much and then also working inside of the home, and that's not something that we should be building an economy around. And that's something that for so long the care system has been built on the back of those unpaid family caregivers, and that does have huge overrepresentation of women of color, not only providing the paid work, but also providing the care for family members who are outside of the service system. We also know that there's really no respite support, and respite support is something that's a very small, unfortunately, line item in the federal budget, and also a very small line item in state budgets. And that's support for a family member who may have someone who has a dementia diagnosis or Alzheimer's, or who has significant support needs and has disabilities. And sometimes they might just need that weekend away, so that and I'm not talking about for vacation, I'm talking about so that they can do something for work, or so that they can have that support. But even those temporary supports are not available in any great way. And so all of that together means that we have a service system that, for people with disabilities especially, there's an over reliance on aging family caregivers. And so then what happens is you have people entering services in a crisis. That's always going to be more expensive. And so again, all of the pandemic has really shown what, as a disability community and as aging communities, we have known, which is that people are filling in the gaps, care is filling in the gaps, and it needs to be recognized so that it's paid. It's paid for either by the family members if they want to continue to be providing that care, or that family members can rely on good care, because those jobs are well paid, because people that are doing the work that Grace does deserve to make family sustaining wages. And that also gives peace of mind to family caregivers, so that we can go out and be part of the economy, and so that people with disabilities can as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Nicole. I often am such, from my own experiences on watching my mom and watching friends around me, the impacts on family caregivers and the lack of support that there is for family caregivers is just huge. And I often say that we're setting up a generation of family caregivers to age into poverty ourselves, because like you said, we're, cutting back on work and having to turn down promotions and having, to stop pursuing our careers to move back home, or there's just all of these impacts that then impact our long-term earnings and our long-term savings and our ability to really set up a future for ourselves and our families in a way that's just economically devastating. And of course, more economically devastating for Black and Brown women, especially Black women with disabilities who are already, disincentivized from being in the workforce. And all of those impacts are multi-generational impacts. They impact our future families, and they impact the people that have cared for us that now need us to step in and care for them. And it's just a terrible cycle that, if we don't disrupt and invest in now, will continue to perpetuate things that will continue to make families economically unstable in moments of crisis when we need the most support. Grace, the pandemic has inequitably impacted women. We know that. We see that. We feel that, right? All three of us on this panel can really acclaim to that, but especially Black and Brown women. Can you tell us about what have been new opportunities and challenges the pandemic has posed for the health and financial well-being of you and your family?
I have actually gotten more work during the pandemic. I used to work 12 hours, but now I'm working 24 hours for the safety also of the senior patient that I'm taking care of. Uh, the advantage is you get paid a little more, but the disadvantage is I don't get to see my family. I only have 1 day a week to be with my family now. Our pay is so minimal that you want to work more hours, but it comes at a cost to the time you get with your family. You're taking care of seniors all the time, and you barely have time to take care of your own family, which is sad also.
That is sad. I can understand that because wages are so low when there are more hours, it's an opportunity to work more and to make more. And yet that takes you away from your own family. The care work that you have to do, that you've chosen to do, takes you away from caring and investing in your own family. um, so, Grace, how will investing in care, how will investing in the care infrastructure encourage equitable job creation and shape community investments to address how care has been consistently devalued in our culture? Uh-oh, I'm not sure, Grace, if we can hear you. Is it just me?
I believe the jobs for our nation's economic development. I think it's reasonable and fair that we get paid a living. Um, can you hear me now? I can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Can you hear me now? Or just
Yes, we can hear you.
give me a second. Can you hear me? Invest in making domestic work quality jobs for our economic development. And I think it's just reasonable and fair to get healthcare insurance, be able to take vacation once in a while, bereavement leave, and also to be able to save for our retirement. These are some benefits that are very common to some other jobs or industries, but not to us domestic workers. Also, undocumented workers, essential workers. I sincerely hope that there would be a chance for them to have a pathway to citizenship, to have equal opportunity. Um, this will transform the workforce and our ability to have the wages and benefits we need. So many people need care right now. So investing in workers would not only create new jobs, but would help other people and families. These jobs allows others to work. It is the work that makes all work possible. So we are definitely essential workers.
Thank you, Grace. I don't know a better definition or example of essential worker than you and what you described in your work. And I think it is worth noting that investments in our care infrastructure really means an assurance for families that that we all will be able to get the services that we need when we need them. And real investments in the care infrastructure also expands
Are you
services,
still there?
particularly at the state level. Because state budgets are so strained, they tend to limit the types of care that are available. And that we have seen, Nicole and I can talk about all of the care deserts that we have seen where there's not enough workers, there's not enough services, and the services are really limited. And the more we invest in our care infrastructure, the more services and programs that we'll have in our community. The other thing that I think is a direct outcome of investments in our care infrastructure is that we will have more people working. I think we tend to forget that people with disabilities and older adults are still contributing members to our economy and to our job force. And without the investments in the care infrastructure, those are job supporting services. And we miss out on such a plethora of diversity and expertise if we're not investing in our communities and in community care. At the end of the day, we're all either going to need care or receive care. So we all have a personal interest in the conversation that's happening at the national level that has raised the spotlight on care, but also in demanding that we really modernize our care infrastructure and make real long overdue investments in our care infrastructure. And it can't be small. The care infrastructure that we currently have has been underfunded for decades, which means to level it up to where we need it to be just for current demand requires a large investment, requires an investment minimally equal to the value of the uncompensated care that family caregivers give, which I will remind you is upwards of $500 billion. That's where we're at, and that's what we need. Nicole, COVID has also revealed how dangerous and dehumanizing nursing homes can be and institutional settings. And we know there was a time when where the breakout was happening throughout nursing homes. And then, a lot of community care and adult daycare centers shut down, really revealing the gaps in our care infrastructure, particularly for people with disabilities and particularly for older adults. That's why many of us are advocating, have been for decades, to move from institutional care to care in the home and in the community. Again, we know the statistic that over 80% of people want to age and heal and live in their homes and community. It increases interaction, decreases isolation, right? There's just lots and lots of benefits to it. How does prioritizing the needs of disabled people help center a better care system for all of us? And why is this key to a more equitable and humanizing care infrastructure?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think when we're centering the needs of people with disabilities, ultimately what that is doing is centering the need to invest in home and community-based care. And there's a saying that goes that if you make something work for people with disabilities, it'll work better for everyone. I mean, I think if you think about just simple things like some of the access that came through the Americans with Disabilities Act that all of us take for granted and benefit from every day, it's a really silly example, but it's one really concrete example. We have learned that even when we're talking about things like how do we improve healthcare generally, as we've moved into those spaces, we've been able to say things like, if you're not thinking about home and community-based care, when you're talking about things like, healthcare generally, modernizing healthcare generally, then you're not actually thinking about the needs of everyone. And so we know that as we're moving towards a better care system, when it comes to long-term services and supports and long-term care, that is going to look like building the alternative to those dangerous large congregate settings. And it's really important that everybody really thinks about that home and community-based services are the alternative to nursing home care and institutional care. And I think we haven't done a good enough job of kind of explaining that. But frankly, unfortunately, the tragedy that has happened in COVID during COVID in the pandemic, as COVID ran through nursing facilities and institutions like wildfire. I mean, in Illinois, the National Guard was called in because 2 of the state institutions had over half of the people were infected. I mean, and these are things that unfortunately didn't get the same national media attention as the nursing facilities. But again, that's why we have to continue to center people with disabilities, because sometimes it's not always getting the same attention. But we also know that COVID has punctuated the inequities and segregation that has been around for years. We know when we look at the death and infection rate in large congregate settings, there was a huge racial disparity, which shows how much inequity there is in access to home and community-based services. And so we really need to look at creating a system that is based on quality outcomes, that is based on equitable access and results. And also that the workforce is being judged on those results, that they're not being judged on antiquated methods, that they're being judged on good outcomes and good quality for the people that they're supporting. I'm sure Grace can talk about the amount of unnecessary paperwork that gets in the way of actually providing care. And we have to make sure that self-direction is a concept that really is about people with disabilities, with any support they may need, directing their own care. We have to listen to people with lived experience, both people with disabilities and aging adults, as well as the workforce that supports them when we're rebuilding the system, or else we're just going to keep building one broken piece on top of another broken piece, which is frankly how we've gotten to where we are. We need to make sure that that we're supporting all people in their homes and communities. Again, I mentioned the inequities or the disparities when we look at the death and infection rates in long-term care facilities. And so we have to make sure that we're getting into populations that might not know about the alternative to nursing home facilities, or just generally any of the long-term supports at all, because again, there's so many people that are just doing it on their own. We have to make sure that we're getting into and educating everybody. And we have to continue to build career ladders in the workforce as well. We have to make sure that direct care jobs can lead to careers and advancement, and that we're dealing with making this a workforce that gets the respect that they deserve as the essential workforce that Grace just laid out so much more eloquently than I could. I mean, that's been the biggest frustration at the ARC. About a month into the pandemic, I wrote a blog and we started a campaign around #WeAreEssential, because I just wanted to throw things, because it just didn't seem like Congress or the general public understood how, just in the same way that nurses and other frontline healthcare providers were doing things that obviously were heroic and should be applauded, the direct care workforce, direct support professionals, home care workers were doing things that couldn't be done from 6 feet away without access to PPE, without access to hazard pay. And I mean, we just have to make sure that this essential workforce also raises up as we're fixing the system as well, or else it's going to continue to be an inequitable system.
Yeah, I think that's so much good information that I think it's critical to thinking about how we rebuild and how we invest, particularly as we're looking for alternatives. This is the alternative. There aren't, many other alternatives, and we have to think about it comprehensively. So a lot of my colleagues will often call me out because I truly believe that care and caregiving is at the center of everything. And that if we invest and disrupt the current cycle that we have on care and caregiving, it's one of the single most transformative things that we can do to change the economic trajectory of all of our families. And I can connect care and caregiving to anything because I think it's so deeply connected. For example, I don't think that we can talk about caregiving without talking about paid leave. Many family caregivers are working caregivers, and when you have to take off to go check on, when I had to take off to come check on my mom, I was lucky to be under an employer who had paid leave, but there are many people who don't have paid leave, right? There's so many connections to care and caregiving because it's central to everything. So my question to both of you is why is care at the center of everything, and how is it connected to various issues, like mortgage banking and real estate and retirement planning and many other things? I think it's easy to sort of think about this as a siloed issue for people with disabilities and for aging adults, and to miss the interconnectedness of care and caregiving to everything. So Grace, what would you say about that? I think you're on mute, Grace. Oh no, Grace, I think we've lost your sound again. No, we still can't hear you. We still can't hear you. Nicole, do you want to go while Grace is sorting out her sound?
Sure. So, I mean, I think that there's obviously, sorry, I thought I heard her. I mean, I think that we know that we have to do more than it's about more than just access to services. We know that there has to be,
We as caregivers are tasked with being. Hold on. And there you go. Okay. We as caregiver and helping people stay in their home and providing support and encouragement to hold on. Let's go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, duties of providing care and helping people stay in their home and providing support and encouragement to our patients, but we don't have any type of security ourselves. Retirement security for caregivers is a huge issue. Like me, I've been working for 18 years. We can't make enough to save for our retirement. I can't make it. I can't even save for my retirement. We care for other people's families, but we don't know that we'll have that care when we get older. More investment in care means that I would be able to have more rest, means that I won't be scared to losing my job, and that I would spend more time with my family, and of course have retirement security.
Yeah, that's all super important. And I mean, I think that it's not just about, right, it's not just about taking care of the workforce that are taking care of so many people now. It's also about making sure that they can, that people like Grace, who should be able to, can rely on the fact that they can retire safely and have the services that they need as they age, and the finances that they need as they age, which is again why we have to fundamentally get to this issue. We also know that we have to make sure that we have enough housing stock, not only for people with disabilities and aging adults, but also for the workforce, and making sure that there's that people don't have to have stress around access to housing. The access to services will ultimately make the housing simpler, because right now sometimes you'll be in a state where there's enough housing stock but there's not enough services, and it really has to be both and. We obviously also know that employment will improve for people with disabilities when you're investing in the workforce. So often I hear stories about people who are, have a job coach who makes less money than the person that they're supporting in their job. I mean, there's just so many fundamental things that will shift when we're making these investments. And ultimately, it will allow us to turn to other problems that hinder people with disabilities and aging adults, including income and asset limits and Social Security. Again, the things that make people with disabilities and aging adults unable to save, unable to build their own financial independence, and to keep them poor in order to access the services they need. So there's so many different ways that this funding will have an impact, and on multiple things besides just the HCBS system.
Thank you both for that. So I think we're all sitting at the edge of our seats because we're at a tipping point when it comes to valuing and visibilizing care, and the policies that we need to make the caring future we want possible feel like they're within reach, right? They feel like this could be the year I won't even put it out into next year. Like, this is the year. This is the year we're going to really relay the foundation for the care infrastructure that we need. And then the subsequent years will build on top of that. But what would you say it will take to make the economic recovery equitable, especially for the most marginalized? And what do you want the economy to look like for the next generation of caregivers? We'll start with you, Nicole.
Sure. I mean, I think that what it will take for the economic recovery to be equitable is for it to be seen as something that needs to be a continued investment. When we look at the Medicaid home and community-based service space, we had a year with nothing, a year with no investment. And so in March, we were really glad to see in the American Rescue Plan 1 year of funding, but really that was about plugging holes in a sinking ship, frankly. That was money that should have been passed in March of 2020. And so we have that, and now really states look at that investment as a bit of a cliff because it's only for 1 year. So now we have this huge opportunity of this $400 billion investment included in the American Jobs Plan. And this will, no pun intended, but be the bridge to a system that we ultimately need to get to where everybody does have access to the service that they need, that we're making sure that we're reaching into communities that might not know about the services that are available. All of that has to occur. And so ultimately what our goal will be after the $400 billion investment will be get to a place where every person in the service system knows that they can have access to those home and community-based services. We'll fundamentally deal with the institutional bias. That might be a next year problem, but the huge investment is going to get us closer to what I want the economy to look like and what I want this system to look like. And that's really a service system that's so rich, literally, that has the funding that it needs to pay the workforce with a family sustaining wage, that people with disabilities and aging adults and family caregivers have that reliable workforce, so that they can have access to anything, the support that they need without fear of someone not showing up the next day because they got a better opportunity down the street. And that I would never fault a worker for making more money. And that's the unfortunate situation that we're in. I want there to be a system where we have parity across the states when it comes to the services available and supports, as well as supports for workers. This will also mean people with disabilities and aging adults and family caregivers will have the same freedom to relocate that anyone else does. No waiting for services and equitable access and understanding of those services. We have people in some states that are waiting over 10 years for services, some people dying while they're waiting for services. That just cannot happen. And ultimately that will create a thriving care infrastructure, which is going to lead to economic growth for the workers, for the people with disabilities and aging adults who want to remain part of the economy, want to be part of the economy, have the opportunity to do so, and family caregivers who are filling in those gaps in the services. And we know that this problem is growing. We have a population that's aging. We know that 1 million people with autism will be aging into the adult service system in the next 10 years. This has to happen, or else it's just going to get worse and worse.
Grace, what about you? What do you think it will take to make the economic recovery equitable? And what do you want the economy to look like for the next generation of caregivers? Oh no, we've lost your audio again.
Caregiving big heart. We spend more time with our clients than with our only serve. I would like for the future. Hold on. Can you hear me now? Nothing.
Yes, we can hear you now. Maybe try turning off your video and see if that helps.
This one. Can you hear me? It's okay now? Yeah.
Yes.
Again, caregiving job needs a lot of attention, time, patience, and a big heart. We spend more time with our clients than with our own family. In order to gain the respect and dignity we deserve, I would like for the future caregivers to have the peace of mind in terms of job security, that we would be able to take care of our health, and we'll be able to take time off without worrying about not being paid. Pathway to citizenship to undocumented essential workers, and also lastly, I would like to see the future caregiver have retirement pay and the means to age and die with the dignity like the citizens.
Okay. I think we lost you a little bit at the end, but we caught most of what you said, Grace. Um, so we have a question from the audience about from one of the audience members that said, I cared for my 96-year-old mother with the help of hospice, which again, people should do a little bit of research to see what your options are in accessing hospice and why you need to be part of this advocacy community. My sister is caring for her grandchildren, and the gap of this generational care is widening, which we completely agree. What can the federal government create specific dollars and more resources to ensure we can care for our loved ones? Nicole, what are your thoughts on this? And then I definitely have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Pamela. I think that that's exactly, luckily, what we're finally seeing a real congressional and administrative will to do. I think that, again, it's we haven't seen a national or huge investment in home and community-based services since they were created 40 years ago. And so really it is because I think that as a service system, they took care of people like you and your sister, and just kind of assumed that that was just something that really, frankly, a burden that women were going to bear. And whether that's through paid work or not. And so the fact of the matter is that an investment in Medicaid, home and community-based services, is exactly what we're talking about for that federal government to create specific dollars, because those dollars could be either for a paid caregiver like Grace to support your mother, or child care worker to support those children that your sister's caring for. But ultimately, also, those funds could be used to pay family caregivers who do want to continue to provide that care. So it can be a both and, but really it is that investment in the only game in town, which is Medicaid, and also further modernizations that are going to be needed after this $400 billion investment. But the $12.7 billion from March was unprecedented. So $400 billion is going to get us a lot closer to this service system that will take care of the generational care gap that I certainly recognize personally and professionally is growing every day.
Yeah, I agree with that, Nicole. I think, the federal government really has to step in here. This is not an issue that can solely be solved within families. All of our families are doing the best we can, and at the end of the day, we're stretched thin, and it just doesn't work solely by families. And we know that states can't do it alone either. The need for resources, the growing demand, the need to really recruit and retain workers, it's too much for a state to do on its own. And so the federal government really has to step in here. It is both about investing big dollars. This cannot be a small amount. A small amount will not be sufficient. It will lead to us as families and states making tough decisions about what they do and don't do and what they prioritize without a robust enough investment. And the federal government has to set a floor for services. The federal government has to say you have to provide home and community-based services. It can't be optional. The federal government has to really help in wage setting practices, because we know that the wages of workers is primarily set by the influence of Medicaid. So the federal government has to really set the floor for that. And we know that there has always been a level of flexibility within Medicaid programs under the federal government for states to both innovate and experiment with other things and to best serve their populations. But that has to be done on top of a common foundation and floor that sets a shared understanding of quality care and quality services and quality programs. So I think, the federal government really has to play a role here. I often talk about 2030 as a huge tipping point in the aging population, as well as new kids being born. And that tipping point in 2030 of the aging population is going to, completely annihilate our care system. And that's 8-9 years away. That's around the corner when you think about investments and setting up programs. Now is the time that we have to do this. Now is the time that we have to both invest in care, invest in the workforce, invest in family caregivers, to really be at a place where we are not in any more crisis in 2030. So now's the time to really do that investment, both in a way that sets a common foundation, but also allows for a level of flexibility for states to do different things as they need. And we can't forget the need to recruit and retain workers. None of this happens without the workforce. In many places, like Hawaii, they have service dollars and they don't have workers. And so we have to think about all of this comprehensively. And because all of our experiences aren't in silos, we have to be the ones holding the line, saying, actually, you're not going to parse this out. You're not going to silo this out. As decision makers, as policymakers, as members of Congress, all of this belongs together in one package, in one meaningful investment, because that's how our families experience it. So we're the ones that have to hold the line and make the demands based on our experiences. And the last thing I'll say about the question that was posed is, we recognize that our experiences make us experts. So we need our personal experiences to lead the way in identifying the solutions and in making this real for policymakers who can otherwise default to numbers that don't have faces and to programs that don't have faces. So the more we tell our stories, and the more we tell our stories to people in power who are decision makers, the more we can connect the reality of our experiences and in our expertise. Because you've been a family caregiver, because we've all access to various parts of the systems, we know what works and what doesn't work, sheerly based on our experiences, and that makes us experts in this moment.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Nicole.
I was going to say, and I think that's such an important point, Josie. And I also think it's important to know all you have to be an expert on is your own experience. You don't have to know the ins and outs of Medicaid, whether you're a worker or a family caregiver. You just have to know the importance of the work that you're doing and that it's a problem. And that's all you have to know. And you have to also make sure you're informing other people outside of the system so we can continue to break down the silos.
That's it. That's it. We talk about building a movement, and that's how we do it. A movement of caregivers and care workers and care recipients. And that puts us in the millions in power. And our power can really lead to an increased demand, and we can win the very things that our families and our communities need. So we are at time, and to close, I would love to hear from you both about what is giving you hope in this moment, and drop your organization name and website where people can find you for more information and to get involved.
Sure. I think the hope for the moment is the huge momentum and education that came from the threats. And I don't just mean the pandemic. I mean the threats against the Medicaid system overall that led to people having a greater understanding, and the fact that we're seeing these huge investments and the continued doubling down on them. And I'm not sure if folks know this, but I know the White House knows this, which is the fact that there is no part of the American Jobs Plan, which is the infrastructure plan, that is polling better than the investment in home and community-based services. And that's because everybody is a caregiver, and it's because people are feeling more comfortable talking about the stresses of that. And I think that that's why we're going to be able to win, and why we're going to be able to keep winning on this issue.
Thanks, Nicole. And where can people find you to get more involved?
Oh, yes. The arc.org/action is where you can find out everything that we're doing, our story collection, our action alerts to Congress. And again, really glad to be joining you all today.
Thanks, Nicole. Grace, what gives you hope in this moment, and where can people find you to get more involved? Oh no, your audio is doing that thing again.
I think stories. Can you hear me now? We as caregivers
Yes.
need to continually share our stories. Yeah, we need to continually share our stories for everybody to know what's going on. And also, I'm hopeful that our new administration, President Biden, finally gave us this 4 billion budget for essential workers,
Yeah.
basically. So I'm hopeful that our industry would improve for our future caregivers.
Great. Thanks, Grace.
Yeah, I'm with Filipino Worker Center. We have a Facebook page, PWC of Southern California. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Grace. Thanks, everyone, for joining. My hope is in more conversations like this, where we're talking about policy and sharing our personal experiences and stories. And you can get more involved by going to caringacross.org or familyvaluesatwork.org. We need everyone's voice, everyone taking action to really get us to a place where we have a just economy and a care infrastructure that works for everyone. Thanks, everybody.